What if the nuts the ancient world treated as precious commodities, trading them across continents, offering them as diplomatic gifts to kings, incorporating them into the most sacred architecture of their civilization, were not valuable because they were rare? What if they were valuable because the people who used them could see with their own eyes what happened to those who ate them consistently, and what happened to those who did not? In the biblical world, nuts were not snacks. They were concentrated medicine. Dense packages of fat, protein, and micronutrients so precisely calibrated for the human body that modern nutritional science keeps returning to them as reference points for what optimal eating actually looks like. Stay with me, because nut number 5 on this list was chosen by a patriarch sending his sons to negotiate with the most powerful man in Egypt during a regional famine. And he chose it as a gift worthy of that negotiation, which tells you everything about how its value was understood in the ancient world. And nut number 1 was so sacred that God gave Moses specific instructions to carve its blossom shape into the most important object in the tabernacle. And the cardiovascular research that has accumulated around it is some of the most consistent in all of nutritional science. 7 biblical nuts. Here's what the research actually shows. Number 7. Walnuts, the nut of the sacred grove that Solomon visited. In the Song of Solomon 6:11, the writer says, "I went down to the grove of nut trees to look at the new growth in the valley." The specific tree referred to in the original Hebrew text is the walnut. Think about what it means to have a walnut grove described in the most celebrated love poetry in ancient scripture. This was not agricultural inventory. This was beauty. The walnut was beautiful enough, significant enough, to be used as the setting for a moment of profound meaning. And the people who tended those groves were eating from them every day. Walnuts are the only commonly consumed nut with a significant concentration of alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3 fatty acid that the body uses to regulate inflammatory signaling throughout the entire system. Clinical research has found that regular walnut consumption produces meaningful reductions in LDL cholesterol and total cholesterol, measurable improvements in arterial flexibility, and lower levels of inflammation markers in the blood. A large prospective study found that people who ate walnuts regularly had a significantly lower risk of cardiovascular death compared to those who did not, even after controlling for every other lifestyle factor. But the research that has most surprised the scientific community concerns the brain. Studies have found that walnut consumption is associated with better cognitive performance in older adults, improved memory, and slower rates of cognitive decline. The brain is 60% fat by dry weight, and the specific fat profile of walnuts, including the omega-3 content, appears to be uniquely suited to maintaining the structural integrity of brain tissue as it ages. Now, the ancient world that planted walnut groves and wrote poetry about them was observing outcomes that took modern science 2,000 years to quantify. Number 6. Chestnuts, the ancient grain substitute that carried populations through winter. In Genesis 30:37, Jacob takes rods from poplar, almond, and plane trees, which is translated in some versions as chestnut, to peel back the bark and expose the white wood beneath. The chestnut tree was a familiar, deeply embedded part of the ancient Near Eastern landscape. Communities in the mountainous regions of the biblical world depended on chestnuts as a primary caloric staple through winter months, when other crops were unavailable. Unlike most nuts, chestnuts are low in fat and exceptionally high in complex carbohydrates, making them function nutritionally more like a grain than a traditional nut. They were ground into flour for bread, boiled into porridge, and roasted directly as a sustaining food. Modern research has found that chestnuts have a uniquely low glycemic index for a high carbohydrate food, meaning they produce a slow, stable blood sugar response rather than the sharp spike and crash of refined grain products. They are rich in vitamin C, an unusual quality for a nut, and contain meaningful amounts of B vitamins, potassium, and manganese. The fiber content supports gut bacteria diversity in ways that have been associated with reduced metabolic disease risk in population studies. The people who survived harsh winters on chestnuts were not eating second-best survival food. They were eating a precisely calibrated energy source that kept blood sugar stable, fed their gut microbiome, and delivered micronutrients their bodies needed to function through the cold months. Modern science is only beginning to document what those communities observed through generations of lived experience. Number 5, pistachios. The nut a patriarch considered worthy of a king. In Genesis 43:11, Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to negotiate for grain during a devastating famine. He tells them to bring gifts. Read that sentence carefully. A man whose family faces starvation chooses pistachios as something worth offering to the ruler who controls the entire region's food supply. That single decision encodes thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about what pistachios were worth. They were not a snack, they were currency-grade nutrition. Pistachios are unique among all nuts in their concentration of lutein and zeaxanthin, two carotenoids that are the primary protective compounds for the macula of the human eye. Regular pistachio consumption is now directly linked in clinical research to reduced risk of age-related macular degeneration, one of the leading causes of blindness in aging populations worldwide. They contain more potassium per serving than most other nuts, which directly supports blood pressure regulation. Their essential amino acid profile is unusually complete for a plant food, making them a powerful complementary protein source. But what genuinely surprises researchers studying the gut microbiome is what pistachios do specifically to the colon. Clinical studies have shown that regular pistachio consumption significantly increases populations of bifidobacterium and lactic acid bacteria more effectively than most other nuts tested. The cell wall structure of pistachios also means that some of their fat is not fully absorbed during digestion, and instead passes through to feed bacteria, which is why they provide greater satiety and fewer net calories than their label implies. Jacob understood value, and he had spent his life observing it. The research says he was right. Number 4, hazelnuts. The forgotten nut of the ancient garden that modern oncology is revisiting. Hazelnuts have been cultivated and eaten across the Mediterranean and the ancient Near East for thousands of years. They appear in ancient Egyptian records, in Roman agricultural texts, and in the food traditions of the broader biblical world as a staple of the autumn harvest. They were ground into paste, pressed for oil, and eaten whole as daily nutrition. The modern world has largely reduced hazelnuts to a chocolate flavoring, which is one of the more unfortunate category errors in recent food history. Hazelnuts are among the richest sources of vitamin E in the natural world, delivering alpha-tocopherol, the most bioavailable form, in concentrations that rival almonds. This matters because vitamin E is a fat-soluble antioxidant that protects cell membranes from oxidative damage, and oxidative damage to cell membranes is directly implicated in aging, cardiovascular disease, and cancer development. Hazelnuts also contain a compound called beta-sitosterol, a plant sterol that has been studied for its ability to reduce LDL cholesterol absorption in the gut, with clinical trials showing meaningful reductions in total cholesterol in people who consume plant sterols regularly. Research has also found that hazelnut consumption is associated with reduced inflammatory markers, improved antioxidant status in the blood, and better metabolic outcomes in people at cardiovascular risk. If you are finding this kind of content valuable, this is a good moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We post every week, and every video goes deeper into what ancient wisdom got right about the human body, long before modern science existed to explain it. The people who harvested hazelnuts every autumn across the ancient Mediterranean were not making a compromised choice. They were eating one of the most complete sources of fat-soluble antioxidant protection available from any food source. Number 3, carob, the fruit of survival and the pod that the prodigal son longed for. In Luke 15, the prodigal son, having squandered everything, finds himself starving and feeding pigs. The text says he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. Those pods were carob. The fact that carob appears at the lowest point of this parable, the moment of greatest hunger and desolation, tells you how it was perceived. It was the food you ate when there was nothing else. But the biology behind that survival role is more sophisticated than its humble reputation suggests. Carob pods are naturally sweet, containing no added sugar, and they carry a type of fiber called carob gum, or locust bean gum, that has been studied extensively for its metabolic effects. This fiber forms a slow-moving gel in the gut that flattens blood sugar response after meals, reduces the absorption of LDL cholesterol, and feeds beneficial bacteria in the colon. The effect is structurally similar to the beta-glucan in barley, which has its own established clinical record for cardiovascular protection, but through a different mechanism. Carob also contains condensed tannins with documented antidiarrheal properties. Many ancient healers used carob preparation specifically for gastrointestinal infections, and research has confirmed that carob tannins disrupt the adhesion of pathogenic bacteria to the gut wall and reduce the fluid secretion that drives diarrheal illness. The food that the prodigal son could barely bring himself to consume was actually one of the most therapeutically complete pod foods available in that world. He was surviving on better medicine than he realized. Number 2. Walnuts revisited through the lens of the ancient Persian Empire. Actually, let me move on to pine nuts. Number 2. Pine nuts. The ancient harvest that fed the builders of the biblical world. Pine nuts appear throughout ancient Near Eastern food traditions and were a primary caloric source in the mountainous and forested regions of the biblical world for thousands of years. They were pressed for oil, added to grain dishes, and eaten directly as a dense, sustaining food by people who spent their days in physical labor. The pinole pine nuts of the Mediterranean, stone pine seeds, were traded across the ancient world precisely because their nutritional density made them an efficient and portable food for soldiers, builders, and long-distance travelers. Modern research has found that pine nuts contain a unique fatty acid called pinolenic acid, found in significant concentrations in almost no other food, that has been studied for its effects on appetite regulation. Pinolenic acid appears to stimulate the release of cholecystokinin, a hormone that signals fullness to the brain, producing an appetite-suppressing effect that is measurably greater than that of most other fats. This finding has attracted significant research attention from obesity researchers. Pine nuts are also rich in zinc, a mineral essential for immune function, wound healing, and DNA synthesis, in a form the body absorbs efficiently. They contain meaningful amounts of magnesium, vitamin E, and monounsaturated fats with documented cardiovascular benefits. The ancient workers who carried pine nuts on long journeys and construction sites were not making a random food choice. They were bringing the most energy-dense, satiety-producing, micronutrient-rich portable food their world offered. The research confirms that their judgment was sound. Number 1. Almonds, of the nut that God built into the architecture of the sacred. When God instructed Moses on the design of the menorah, the sacred lampstand of the tabernacle, the cups were to be shaped like almond blossoms. When Aaron's rod miraculously budded overnight as a sign of divine authority in Numbers 17, it produced almonds. The almond was chosen at multiple moments of the highest theological weight in all of Scripture because it is the first tree to flower each spring, blooming while everything else is still dormant. And the people who chose this image ate almonds every day and watched for decades what happened to those who did and those who did not. Gram for gram. Almonds are among the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. A single serving provides approximately 37% of the daily requirement for vitamin E in its most bioavailable form, the fat-soluble antioxidant that protects cell membranes from oxidative damage at the molecular level. Oxidative damage to cell membranes is directly implicated in aging, cardiovascular disease, and cancer development. Almonds are also exceptionally high in magnesium, a mineral that participates in more than 300 enzymatic reactions in the human body and is deficient in a substantial portion of the modern population due to soil depletion and processed food diets. Magnesium deficiency is linked to anxiety, poor sleep, high blood pressure, muscle cramping, and impaired glucose regulation. Clinical trials on almonds specifically have shown that regular consumption lowers LDL cholesterol, reduces post-meal blood sugar spikes, improves gut microbiome diversity, and supports healthy body weight by promoting satiety that lasts for hours. The fat inside almonds is also partially non-absorbable due to the structure of their cell walls, meaning some of it feeds gut bacteria rather than being stored as body fat. Traditional use was raw or lightly roasted almonds eaten as a daily nutrient source, almond paste used in cooking and as a spread, pressed almond oil applied to skin for healing and hydration. The ancient world built this nut into sacred architecture because it was that important. Modern nutritional science, with all of its equipment and methodology, keeps arriving at the same conclusion they reach through direct observation. Modern science did not discover these benefits, it confirmed them. 7 nuts, each one identified, cultivated, and built into the most significant structures of ancient civilization, not because of tradition or taste, but because the people who ate them watched what they produced in human bodies across generations and understood the value of what they had. That knowledge is still available. It has been available the entire time. The nuts are still in every grocery store. The question is only whether you treat them as snacks or as what the ancient world always understood them to be. Tell me in the comments which nut surprised you most. Was it walnuts, with the brain health research that is changing how neurologists think about dietary fat? Was it pistachios, the gift a patriarch chose for a king, to carrying gut microbiome effects that modern researchers are still working to fully map? Or almonds, the nut God chose for the menorah, with a nutritional profile so complete that clinical trials keep confirming what the ancient world knew without running a single one? I read every comment. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that button and the notification bell. We post every week, and the next video is going to go somewhere most people have never thought to look.